anchoring tonight's media panel, and he will also be moderating as soon as we're done. So all the speakers, don't go anywhere. If you gotta go pee, I don't care. You're coming up right there after Rodney's done. Our final media panel speaker is Rodney Palmer. Now, Mr. Palmer is an award-winning journalist who has worked for the 20 years as a foreign correspondent for CTV News, an investigative reporter for CBC Radio and Television. He was the CTV News foreign correspondent and bureau chief in India, China, and the Middle East. He is a real deal, old school beat journalist. Please help me welcome tonight's anchor, Rodney Palmer.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm the guy who's not working as a journalist for as long as I did, for about 20 years, and I'm frankly in awe of our panel tonight and the speakers we've just heard, because they are the only media worth listening to in Canada today. I started working as a journalist when I was 16 years old in Sault Ste. Marie when I was in high school, and I found out I could get paid to write. And then I went and got trained as a journalist at Ryerson Journalism School. And I started working at the Vancouver Sun in 1987. I moved over to the CBC, and I had a long career where I eventually went to CTV News and worked as a foreign correspondent, and opened their first bureau in India. I ran the Middle East Bureau out of Jerusalem and covered a civil war there. I went to China, I covered the SARS outbreak there, and there I got quite a very close insight into how the world handles a pandemic, how the World Health Organization reacts to a pandemic. And certainly noticed it wasn't the same this time around. Very different. They started shutting cities down. They started shutting the world down. And I bought into it. I thought, like everybody else, this is scary, let's go home, let's hide in our kitchen. But then we only had really the CBC radio to listen to. And I very quickly started recognizing that something wasn't quite right when our Prime Minister said, don't worry, Canada, we've invested in a vaccine company in Vancouver. I thought, well, how long am I waiting in my kitchen for this to end? A vaccine, this takes a decade. And then I started hearing, my heroes on CBC Radio, like Matt Galway on The Current, interview a guy from the Center for Digital Hate talking about how vitamin C intravenous was murder. Yeah, and well, anybody who has been involved in outside of the mainstream medical system knows that for 50 years, vitamin C intravenous has been saving lives. So I thought they were getting it wrong, and they just needed Rodney back there to tell them what was right. And I started writing letters to Matt Galway and say, I'd love to come and sort of open your eyes about this. And then writing to the head of journalistic standards, Brodie Fenlon, the editor-in-chief of CBC Radio, CBC and all of its journalism. And then I started realizing that they weren't getting it wrong. They were telling us a different story. This was propaganda. This was the government's messaging coming through the CBC. It wasn't a mistake at all. Their intention was to mislead us through government messaging in favor of a particular outcome. And this wasn't just the CBC. I've spoken at the National Citizens Inquiry twice about the CBC. Thank you. And I did a lot of research for those because I was naming my former colleagues, and I know the level that we all worked to together when we used to work in the same field. And I knew that I better have it right before I said it, and I did, and I challenged any of them to poke a hole in anything I said because it's all true. And I never really liked rebel news, I gotta tell you. I thought that this was egomaniacism and just really wanting to get rid of the Liberals and put the Conservatives in, which is fine. They're welcome to do that, but I didn't think it was news until it was the only news. And they started showing the truth and telling the truth, and then I became addicted to the thing. And then I saw Bright Light News, and I saw and recently became to know the Western Standard, and as I was just telling Derek in my preparation for the National Citizens Inquiry just a week ago, I think, it's been a bit of a whirlwind, I wanted to get that graph that the CBC put forth, was the bar chart snapshot of their funding, which was falsified, and very quickly, the only place I could easily get it was the Western Standard. And it came up, they weren't gonna let me see it unless I paid, so of course I paid, and I thought I'm gonna keep paying. And I'm gonna join all of these things, and I'm gonna give them my money because that's my little protest against the CBC, is they all deserve this minuscule $10, $15, whatever they charge. You know, 24 million came pretty quickly when our truckers started rolling across the country. These guys need our money because they can do more with it, and they can tell us more truth, because truth is critical. And I'll tell you how critical it is. 150 or more years ago, when Canada was fledgling, before we had Canada, we had Upper and Lower Canada in the eastern part of our country, in the central part of our country. And it was run by families and nepotism. And there was a man named William Lyon Mackenzie who didn't like this. He was the Derek Fildebrandt of his day. He wanted to point out, he became the first mayor of Toronto. He was a politician. He wanted to point out that this nepotism was not letting enough people have their way and have their say. And he smashed this family compact, they called it, by writing in his little newspaper. And he printed every little word, and every piece of metal went in every letter. And he printed this primitive printing press in his paper called the Colonial Advocate, which was Toronto's newspaper, and he smashed the family compact. And it was journalism that did that, because journalism is not only important, it's not a privilege of democracy, it's a foundational pillar of democracy. Without journalism, democracy doesn't exist. And our democracy is currently floundering because we don't have our mainstream anymore. The CBC is not the only one. I just picked on them because we pay for it. My argument was, if CTV wants to lie to their audience and trick them, if the Toronto Star wants to lie, if Global News wants to lie, and they all lie. If they want to lie about it in favor of their hundreds of millions from the Canadian government, in favor of the pharmaceutical corporate agenda, they're allowed to, unfortunately, until we all stop buying their product. But the CBC we pay for, we're taxed, and it has a high value when it's operating functionally in the news department. And we have to be careful that we don't lose our comedy shows, because Baroness von Sketch in This Hour Is 22 Minutes makes me laugh. But we lost Kathy Jones from This Hour Is 22 Minutes when she said, I'm not taking this vaccination. And I had the extreme honor, and all that I've done by speaking, I got to meet Kathy Jones. I think it's the greatest honor. And she told me, when I opened my laptop, after they were shoving that thing up my nose and they were making me wear a mask, and I finally opened my laptop, she said, and I saw that they were going to start the mandates at the CBC, I said, oh my God, we're finished. And I looked around, and everybody was looking at me. When your dog doesn't understand what you're saying, they just said, you know, she's so funny when she talks, that nobody else seemed to get it but her. And I think there's a few of us who get it in every profession. There's the doctors, there's the odd journalists, there's comedians, there's the odd ones, and it's our duty to speak up and say something. And these independent media voices are absolutely critical. Without them, we have no democracy. They are the ones that are just propping us up right now, because they're telling us the truth. And democracy requires the daily dissemination of facts so that we can form our opinions about them. And my opinion will be different than your opinion and different than your opinion. But the majority opinion will be the one that rules, theoretically and ideally, in a democracy. But how can we ever agree on what's right anymore when we can't agree on what's true? What's true is true. It stands there with or without us. It's the fact, it's the truth, it's stronger than any of us. It lives after we die. But if we can't agree on that, because our system that normally delivered it is now lying to us, then we have to reinvent it. There's an amazing opportunity in this moment to reinvent journalism, and it's being reinvented by necessity, the mother of all invention. It's being reinvented by our speakers, who we're about to hear from again now, the people that you've heard from here, and they are the ones who are telling the truth. So my assignment to all of you who are in this room right now and who may be seeing this on video or watching it at home is pay them. That's how it's going to grow.